Roger versus Garp. The Pirate King defeated not by a monkey, but by a familiar idol. We've also got more new Rocks Pirates members and a sinister plan involving many frozen giants, 2 devil fruits, 1 king, and the annihilation of the world as we know it. But I will say that even for the best of us, this flashback is starting to become a little bit difficult to keep track of logistically. This started out as Loki's flashback, explaining what happened on that one very bad day, which quickly shifted into Harold's flashback, which was then commented by Rocks, and now in this chapter we had an almost full-on Kuja Pirates flashback. So we are now 4 layers deep, and I think according to Inception rules we're going to hit limbo pretty soon. Not that I'm complaining at all, in fact I would be willing for Oda to spend the rest of the year showing us all of this stuff that we have had questions about for decades. And it's gotten to the point where there have been so many answers that these new chapters are actively ruining videos that I have in the works, some of which are ready to post, which I made thinking that we weren't going to address certain topics anytime soon, but Oda seems to have this checklist of things to screw me over by showing in Loki's flashback. With that said, I do really love the idea that Loki is somehow narrating all of this, especially the parts he wasn't there for, because in the modern day Harden's all like, bro, tell me what happened to dad. And as of this chapter, Loki is in the middle of explaining historical in-world idol groups from 4 decades ago. And speaking of, we open up this chapter in a most unexpected location, with the Kuja Pirates being led by Gloriosa. And one minor but very cool note right off the bat is their pirate ship. This is the Perfume Yuta, which is the same pirate ship that is still used by Boa Hancock to this very day. And I think that's notable because you just don't see that many ships that have been sailing for half a century in this world. They tend to have a much shorter lifespan and get either retired or destroyed, so whoever built this here vessel must have been a phenomenal shipwright. And seeing young Gloriosa again was pretty amazing, and I love that she performed a very Boa Hancock-esque monologue about her beauty and how she grows wary of physical perfection, in addition to finally solving the mystery of who Gloriosa left her throne to pursue, and that man was Roger. I feel surprisingly bad for Gloriosa here though, seeing her rejected by Roger, because it's like, what more do I need to do? I am already a perfect 10 Amazon Lily Empress. What is that guy's deal? But I think this goes to illustrate the very real effect and, dare I say, stink of desperation. Whether it's a man or a woman, simping just isn't generally an attractive quality, even if you are objectively one of the top 2 most beautiful women in the world at the time. And this cycle continues because, wild development that I was not expecting, Roger was into Shaki. So he was aggressively simping for her, as were the rest of the Roger Pirates. They were all powerless against the Kuja in general, and Shaki, she wanted none of that. Instead, she made eyes at the only man who was resistant to her charms, which of course is very similar to the situation with Luffy and Boa Hancock. Luffy is the only man who doesn't want to Gomu Gomu no Pistol her, and so he is the one who Hancock fell for. But it's not just the Kuja tribe. This effect happens all throughout the One Piece world. Like Hiyori simping over Zoro and him not caring, or Sanji simping over every woman in the One Piece world who shows no interest towards him, but the one woman who does Charlotte Pudding, Sanji ends up acting completely normal around because she simps for him. TLDR, don't simp. It devalues your existence. But to speak more on Shaki, I honestly didn't recognize her at first. I could not process the long hair. It took my brain a bit to catch up to who it is that I was looking at, and my first thought was actually Baby 5, because up until now she's had the monopoly on long black-haired smokers in the series. I really like seeing Shaki in this style from Oda though, because it shows that there is a moment in Shaki's life where she completely disconnects from her Amazon Lily culture. Right here, she is strongly embedded in it, but when she gives up her reign as Empress to pursue Rayleigh, she finds an individual style and becomes the woman we know today. And also, she probably has to change her look because of all of the idol popularity in posters and photos floating around. But aside from the outfit and the hair, Shaki honestly doesn't look all that different from when she did 4 decades ago. However, the same cannot be said of Gloriosa, and this is a bit of a sad One Piece trend. Gloriosa's shriveled prune style of aging is likely because she was never able to achieve her dream of being with Roger, and it may even be a symptom of lovesickness, which did not kill Gloriosa, but it still took its toll over time. Whereas Shaki was able to completely cure her lovesickness by bagging that Silver's Rayleigh, and having achieved that dream is reflected in her aging. And another good example of this would be Buckingham Stussy. She was in love with Whitebeard, but she did not find the ending that she wanted. I was going to say happy ending, but it sounds too much like jacking him off. And so that took its toll on her, which is why Buckingham Stussy has followed that Gloriosa path of aging. So Oda's message here is, and look, no pressure, but if you do not find and secure your true love, then you are going to be bent over and violently ravished by the aging process. But I also really liked the added context that the Kuja pirates were treated like a One Piece World Idol group with fan mail and the collectible bounty poster trade. And by the way, the girl carrying some of this fan mail is Tritoma. She has a little introduction box and everything, but you may or may not know her because prior to this chapter, we have only heard about her in the SBS of Volume 109. But she was the Empress of Amazon Lily after Shaki and before Boa Hancock. And she is sadly the Empress who did die of love sickness, which is a bit depressing because she's all adorable and so full of life in this chapter. But this is a pretty stacked crew. We are looking at 3 Empresses on one ship. No wonder the idol culture is so prevalent in this era, but I also quite like the idea that all of these idols are quickly flipped into fans for the right person. In fact, Shaki has used that exact word, that she is a fan of Luffy. But there was also a panel during this section that made me do a very literal double take, and it's this one of Roger with the megaphone looking exactly like Shanks, and therefore establishing that apparently every man who inherits the straw hat seems to go through the exact same physical phase, as that's exactly what Shanks looks like when he met Luffy, and according to Oda, Luffy by the time he's 40 years old looks like Shanks as well. Although I guess chronologically it's more accurate to say that Shanks and Luffy look like Roger, and that they go through a Roger phase. But it may or may not be even more accurate here to say that all of them go through a Joy Boy phase, and that ever since the Void Century, the will of Joy Boy has been physically manifesting in each subsequent Straw Hat caretaker. Although other than that panel, I do think that Roger, for obvious reasons, looks a lot more like Ace in the rest of this chapter. But then Roger's love quest is rudely interrupted by a Garp, who, like Gloriosa, is also relentlessly hunting Roger. And we, readers of fictional pirate comics, are treated to a clash of youth, with Roger and Garp seemingly evenly matched and using Conqueror's Haki. And this early clash is so fun to see. It appears to be before either of them really reach that sky-splitting galaxy impact level of power. And even though it is still quite a fierce fight, it really reminds me of seeing Luffy training against Ace as a child. Because both Roger and Garp are making these very childlike faces in that impact panel. And what this really makes me want to see is the very first time that Roger and Garp met. Because here there is already an established rivalry. I want to see how that began. Also, I feel like this chapter seems to all but confirm that Roger was a swordsman. It wasn't just an accessory that he used as an entree to battle. It's what he elects to use in desperate, fierce battles as well. Although I guess a lot of this comes down to the definition of swordsman, and it puts Roger in a similar zone to Shanks, who for some reason isn't recognized as the world's strongest swordsman, despite being a swordsman and only ever using a sword with no fruit powers, and being recognized as stronger than Mihawk. Now, thankfully, there are 2 pages of Elbaf flashback in this chapter, which at this point is one of the only things that still ties this chapter to where we started, and it's quite a sweet 2 pages as well. It's a very welcome moment of, dare I say, mundanity after seeing all of the heartbreak around Loki in the previous chapters. We have Loki being saved after he attempted to set out to sea and almost drowning, which is another parallel to our Monkey D. Luffy. Pretty much the instant that he got out to sea, he was caught in a whirlpool and almost died. But these 2 pages to me are all about Ida, who invited Loki to come and live with her, and Haruden. Haruden did not like that, neither did Loki. And Loki's response is, I think, quite reasonable from his perspective, and a bit sad nonetheless. He accuses Ida of just being nice to him to worm her way into the castle and gain access to all of the riches of the king, which, to be fair to Loki, is his exact experience with his mother Estrid, and at this point in his life, Loki is still not very open to the concept of kindness. There's also a familiar character here, a little girl named Mato, and Mato is the woman who runs Ida's coastal bar in the modern day, who we saw talking to Colin, and also the woman who swoons over Shanks, calling him a, quote, a stud. And there may be a bit of bitter foreshadowing here. As I keep saying, we don't even know if Ida is actually alive or dead in the modern day yet, but in this chapter she has a line about, Mato, why are you crying for me when the world is so full of beautiful and kind people? Which is the sort of line that you can see being a lasting legacy after some sort of tragic flashback death. Don't cry for Ida, instead carry on her will and look forward to the future of a world full of other beautiful and kind people. It makes me nervous for Ida, but we do still have some hope that this will not end in the death of another mother. But this section also mentions that Rox visited Elbaf on multiple occasions, like it was a very regular occurrence, to try and recruit King Harold. And the end of the chapter reveals that there is an ulterior motive behind those visits, which is slightly mind-blowing. But first, the final section of the chapter is dedicated to completing our rock collection, and we get our first proper full group shot of the Rox pirates in an almost complete state. They're still missing a couple of members. Silverax is one of them. We'll get onto him in a bit. And from what I can see, Gil Basta isn't a member yet. And there's also a bunch of background Rox pirates from chapter 1096 we don't see. And very importantly, we still have yet to recruit Gloriosa, which I guess we'll see in the next chapter or even the one after that. Because at this point, look, let's just put King Harold to the side. He's very important, but this does seem to be becoming a full-on Rox Pirates flashback, something that I did not anticipate. In the last chapter, I even said that I didn't think we'd be seeing the God Valley incident at all, because this was supposed to be an Elbaf-focused story, but I no longer believe that. The amount of time that we're spending with the Rox Pirates, Roger, Garp, even the Kuja tribe, that now makes me think that we are going to see at least a good chunk of God Valley, and that it's probably going to be real soon. And if not, I'm not going to lie, I'm going to be a bit disappointed. If we are taking the time to meticulously build and focus on the Rox Pirates like this, and I want to see more of that incident. But for now, some of the biggest news of the chapter for me is that we finally have a canon design for Silver Axe, or Kyo the Wicked, who was the final big name Rox Pirates member that we were still waiting to see. And holy crap, does he look pretty damn amazing or what? I feel like this is the design that people expected Ochoka would look like. And instead what we got was a wacky multi-chinned Carabo cosplayer, who I really hope we get to see in action at some point, because when it comes to those wackier designs, Oda can usually back them up with a lot of substance, but we do need to actually see said substance. The design for Silver Axe, it's pretty wild though. He's kind of like a fusion of elements of other cool looking series characters. The bulkiness, short hair and sunglasses remind me a lot of Zephyr from One Piece Film Z, whilst the chest tattoos are very evocative of Sakazuki and Ryukugyu, and the dark gloves are always a good touch for characters like this. It makes them instantly more intimidating, like the gloves of Charlotte Katakuri or even Bartholomew Kuma. And I love that this dude was the rival of Golden Lion Shiki. We have another gold and silver dynamic happening here, although in that case, I wouldn't want to be the silver. Kind of implies that you're lesser by default. But look, if I'm not mistaken, Silver Axe also looks like he's from Wano. He's got that iconic samurai aesthetic, and in the current translation, he's labeled as a hitman, and I'm interested to see the official translation because I've also seen this translated as Yakuza. And it would make a lot of sense if he was one, because the other known Yakuza of Wano do dress quite similarly to Silver Axe, Hyogoro specifically, and given that Hyogoro is 70 years old, he may have even known or fought against Silver Axe. And if so, he probably knew Shiki as well, because at this point, I'm not seeing a whole lot of answers that don't involve Shiki being from Wano. His clothes, his weapons, his fighting style, his rival, all of them seem to be from Wano, so why not him? But something else I also appreciate is Stroyson getting some panel time to himself. We've known that he was a Rox member for quite some time, but he tends to get shoved into the background a lot, and he really shouldn't because, yeah, dude's got a wacky food power, but he's an extremely dangerous little man. Quite the unhinged psychopath. But we also have something of a new member of the Rox Pirates with Barbell, who isn't exactly a new face, because I believe that we have seen him before in chapter 1096, although he does look strikingly different here. Firstly, he's unbelievably colossal compared to the last time we saw him. And secondly, dude now has hair. Where'd that come from? And it's not just any hair either. No, this is very special hair, as it's almost impossible to look at this and not think of the Gear 5th hair. It looks exactly like the hair that Luffy sports at his most free. However, before we jump to conclusions, the Gear 5th hairstyle should be noted, it's not entirely unique. There are other characters who have had similar hair, like the aforementioned Hyogoro when he's in his big bulky form. And so I'd be able to look past that if Barbell did not have another trademark feature, which is that he's wearing the Ace-style beaded necklace. And if you're unaware, that is likely Ace's homage to Dadan, deciding to wear the same beaded necklace that she wears. And so this is where I start to go, what's happening here? Because Barbell has an iconic feature of both Ace and Luffy. All he really needs is a funky stovepipe hat or a pipe, just a pipe in general, and he will have something representing all three brothers. And it's probably nothing. I doubt that he has any connection to Luffy or Ace, but you cannot give him those two iconic features and not have my mind go straight to that. Also, this is a really weird connection that probably isn't a connection, but there is this dude on Hachinosu who I swear looks like this guy from the Blue Jam Pirates who we saw in the post-war flashback. He doesn't look exactly the same, but he looks similar enough to ping my memory, which has an astounding capacity to store any and all useless information and is not good for much else. It's probably not the same guy, but what I think is happening here is some accidental repetition from Oda. He's so good at coming up with all of these unique designs, but on this occasion, I think he's accidentally used the same unique design again, which makes it not unique. Not to be outdone by his crew though, Rox has yet another incredible moment, which is the creation of the skull of Hachinosu. We see Rox blasting the eye holes like he's playing Minecraft on creative mode, and I love the lore that he is the one who created the skull. It's as if he gave birth to modern piracy itself, and it makes it all the more meaningful that Blackbeard now has command of the island that his father seems to have at least partially, literally built. And it was also just so damn cool seeing the silhouettes of the Rox pirates hanging out in one of the eye holes looking down on the island. It reminds me of that sort of raw aura farming that the Akatsuki gatherings would be like in Naruto, or like the Phantom Troop sitting in their dark, rocky hideout in York New City. But we're getting more specific pieces of Rox's plan here. Firstly, he needs to acquire not just one, but 2 magical fruits. He also needs to revive the frozen GLR giants who we know are on Punk Hazard. And most surprisingly of all, King Harold is the key to all of this. This is taking me back to the days of Kozuki Oden's flashback and how over a handful of chapters, he very suddenly became one of the most important characters to have ever lived in the One Piece world, and the same thing is happening here for Harold. This man is becoming the nexus point of just about everything, because Rox needs him not only to eat Elbaf's legendary devil fruit, because apparently it won't work for anyone but Harold, but he also needs Harold to convince the GLR giants to do what Rox wants. And this is a frankly awkward amount of responsibility to place on a man that we know is dead, and if this was our hope of bringing down the world government, then we've got some serious issues to sort out. But that responsibility will likely get passed on to Loki, who seems to be carrying both the will of Harold combined with the admiration of Rox and his ambition. But there are so many questions left to answer here. One massive one being that we know one devil fruit that Rox needed, which allegedly Loki has already eaten in the modern day, but what was the second required fruit? My bet would currently be that it was one of the devil fruits that were in the chests at God Valley, the one that was called the Treasure of Hachinosu, the one that was stolen from them, the one that made them go to God Valley to begin with. And should the God Valley incident have played out differently, with the victory of the Rox pirates, would King Harold have eventually acquiesced and become part of Rox's plan? At the moment, I would say no, not with Harold's current trajectory of peace, but we have had a rather disturbing glimpse into Harold's future, which is our past, but it is still the future of this past. And so all I know right now is that I need that next chapter immediately.